A goal without a plan is just a wish. Islanders, by Grizzly Games, released rather recently on April 4th, and when I saw its overwhelmingly positive feedback rating on Steam, I thought I'd take a look and see just what makes such a game so beloved. And it didn't take me long to see the appeal of this charming city planning, mini-civ puzzle game. The music is calm and relaxing, that much you notice right off the bat, with ambient background tones of sea breezes, industrial noise, or muffled city chatter filling the space depending on where on the map you're looking. It's the video game equivalent of appealing elevator music. It's like strategy ASMR. Islanders was clearly built with a relaxing, casual level of design at its core, but at the same time there's an undeniable strategy to how the game functions. Even the look of the game has a charming simplicity. It's vibrant and colorful, not overly complex, approachable. What are you trying to do in Islanders? Place buildings to earn points, gain points to get more buildings, and eventually pile up enough points to progress to the next island. A very simple premise. Even with such a straightforward objective, though, there's a wide array of details in the actual gameplay that makes this a strategy game in the sense that it's simultaneously a puzzle game. The obvious limitation is that, as the name suggests, the play area is rather limited. These are islands, after all. Real estate is precious. Saving space for potentially better building placement at later stages of the game can be essential, and some forethought is important to maximize potential scoring. The bar at the bottom of the screen is your inventory, for lack of a better word. As you score points, you'll fill up that round bar on the bottom left that will grant you the option to get different packs of buildings. You choose one of the two options that it presents you, and those buildings from the pack are added to the inventory. You place the buildings in your inventory onto locations around whatever island that you're on, and based on what surrounds each building's effective radius, you earn points, or you lose them. Many buildings complement each other and give points to the player, and many buildings will take them away. So placing a shaman close to another shaman will result in a penalty, but placing farms next to other farms will give a bonus. Lumberjacks get a bonus for being around trees, but being around other lumberjacks will penalize you. And every building in the game has some potential to be reached, as having certain kinds of buildings in the ideal position and placement will allow you to earn higher scores with the most efficient use of the limited land that's available, because as long as you can keep reaching the threshold to get a new pack of buildings, you'll keep going and going and going. Space is really the only limiting factor with what your potential can be. So there's far, far more to Islanders than just placing buildings willy-nilly about the place. In that sense, Islanders is far more a puzzle game than it is a city builder game. The aesthetics of the buildings themselves and how each piece is shaped and designed around a real-world equivalent building is what makes Islanders seem like you're building some kind of a city, when really the game plays almost like I guess you could say a three-dimensional version of Tetris, where certain colored blocks perhaps have preferences and revulsions. So the management of the game comes from space and positioning instead of resources designed around upkeep like in Civilization games. A region's food, health, happiness, and production requirements, they don't exist as a mechanic. Islanders simply isn't as deep and mechanically rich as more complex city-building games are. As I said, think of it as a puzzle game with the aesthetic of building city structures. Placing buildings down is completely free of grids, coordinates on a graph, or sticky positioning. Buildings don't adhere to a strict grid system. You slide them around freely. Buildings go where you put them, which is both a positive and a negative. The benefit is that it gives you more control over where your buildings can be placed, which is especially helpful considering that the islands themselves aren't designed with a grid in mind. The landscape is certainly wild and natural in its inexact, undesigned shape, which contrasts to the much more rigid structural shapes of the buildings the player assigns. It lets you wedge slim buildings into maybe small crevices or thin strips of terrain that you might not be able to do if you are restricted to following a predetermined invisible grid. The negative of having no grid system is that it can be rather hard to plan ahead at times, and if you want to maximize your spacing from building to building, you'll sort of have to eyeball estimate how much space you need for future buildings. So while you're building up a city, you have all your houses on one end and your mansions on the other, and you leave space for a market or a tavern or a temple, because markets benefit from surrounding houses. Temples benefit from almost all surrounding buildings, but have a high cost to place down at all, meaning if you don't place a temple down well, it won't be profitable for points. It can be a little risky depending on how much space you save, since you essentially are operating from memory as to how much room a larger, later stage building might take up. The game is very much about learning, but it's not a frustrating or a punishing affair. You can drop in and out of the game at any time, and even the title screen is an overview of your current progress. You don't feel like you've failed at the end of your game, which happens when you run out of buildings in your inventory and you have not reached the total point threshold to progress towards the next island. And your score is maintained between islands, so you can unlock a new island and travel to it anytime you want, though it's beneficial for personal score bests to stick with the island you have until you can't go anymore, though there's not pressure from the game to do so. It's very much a proceed at your own leisure kind of attitude. From your first game, placing buildings and earning points and seeing all the buildings that eventually become available, and getting used to what gives you points and where it's best to place what you have, and journeying to new stages, you'll feel like you really get the hang of things rather quickly, and what begins as a simple affair of a game shows you just how complex the strategic placement of your buildings can be, and how it's best to have certain kinds of spaces populated by point-generating doodads. The game doesn't force you to devote much to memory, though. It's very lenient with the information that it gives you. As you hover a building around the island looking for a place to maybe settle it down, the point total of a potential location is shown immediately with very clearly shown numbers. Yellow numbers increase a potential score, red numbers drain it. You see a building's radius, where it's getting all its point modifiers from, and hovering over a structure in the inventory lets you know all of its positives and negatives. This building gives this building gives that, this building takes away that. You won't have to guess, and you won't have to roll your eyes in frustration because you didn't calculate all the right numbers in your noggin. You know exactly what a building gets, a forgiving, an easy, and casual feature that at the same time allows you to learn the game's point system quickly and lets you recognize patterns of placements for future utilization. As I've been playing the game, I've noticed as well that it's not only the points from immediate placement that help you. Planning ahead is vital, and with that in mind, you notice as time goes on that certain buildings thematically interact well with another. So mills and breweries go well with hop fields and farms. They all create a countryside appearance that contrasts to the more industrial setup of the areas that will often be outside the urban centers. And even in the places where your buildings mass up, you'll know that just hodgepodging them all together isn't the best long-term strategy. The homes can be on this side, the mansions over there, so that one benefits from the tavern and the other from the jeweler. And as you hover over the temple placement, you'll see the bonuses it gets from mansions. So maybe you'll save that space for a temple later on, and build up mansions around that area so that you can get even bigger scoring from the temple's eventual placement there. And I know I can't put a building at this particular spot because that will give a penalty to another better building being there in the future, and I'm sure you see where this is all going. The room for depth in this puzzle game is extensive, and since islands are often irregularly shaped and sometimes rather tiny, the shifting landscape means you can't simply rely on the same exact strategy over and over and over. There's so much that goes into Islanders without it being overly complex. It's an extremely accessible and rewarding little indie game that's perfect for keeping your attention while you catch up on podcasts like EFAP. Much like Devil Daggers, it's a great game to play passively as you chat with friends or just look to take breaks and settle down for a non-intense bit of engagement. You'll play a bit here and a bit there, and then before you know it, you'll have hours piled up behind you. So go check out Islanders for a charming and approachable puzzle game, because every dollar you spend on Islanders is a dollar you won't spend on Anthem.